It's nice to be here. My name is Keith, and I'm a physical therapist and an orientation mobility specialist, and I love talking about vision. In fact, sometimes maybe a little too much, but anyways, too. So my story is this, with CVI. As a physical therapist, I was treating some of my patients, and, they just didn't seem blind. They had some vision, they could see some things, but they really never looked at my face or anything like that too. And about 18 years ago, I went to a workshop by Dr. Christine Roman, and she started to talk about this thing called cortical vision impairment, and the lights went off. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, this is what I'm seeing going on too. So that's my story in terms of it too. And since then, it's been just a wonderful journey. I learn every single day of it. I'd like to take a survey. We have parents. Good. Caregivers. Medical. Therapists, kind of thing too, going on. Excellent, great, good too. And I'm really sorry. Grandma, Grandpa, the most important people up there. There you go. Gotcha as well too. So there we go. These are not really formal objectives in terms of what you would normally see. We asked what would be of importance for a talk like this too as well. So these are kind of what was suggested, that a lot of you are familiar with CVI, so we didn't really need to go into detail in terms of what it was. But talking about the behaviors and the impact of those behaviors, activities that you can probably do today, going on to as well. And then also collaboration with medical and related services specialists, because even though CDD has a comorbidity already of CVI, which is an advantage in one way, it's still very difficult to get in there, and I certainly acknowledge that too as well. So I always like to start, before we even talk about CVI, just talk about vision in general. 80% of the brain is devoted to vision. 70 to 80% is what we learn is through vision. And then there's 30 separate areas, there's probably even more, in the brain that actually work on detail. The fusiform gyrus in the left temporal lobe does faces. If you want to write that one down, it might be quiz today too. And the world is set up for vision. We live in a visual world. And so if you don't have vision, think about what happens. I just pulled some children's books, and you can kind of see them too as well, just random too. And you can kind of see, they're colorful and whimsical, and the whole thing too going on too as well. Then let's take a look at a book for a child with vision impairment. Look at what is missing. Okay, all that colorful richness and detail and whimsical things too is left to this. So how do we support vision, and how do we make up for what's lost there too as well? So I'm pointing that out too as well. And the other thing to think about, we live in a visual world. Why are stop signs red that we see? And so let's up the game. Okay, we have an emergency vehicle. So not only do we have a red light, let's make it flashing. Okay, so we live in this visual world. The other thing to think about too is something called incidental learning. When I come up to you and I just smile, if you can't see that smile, you've lost that interaction, that kind of thing too. If you're watching perhaps a child out in play on the playground, and you see them with really colorful shoes or something like that too, oh, wow, what a neat stylish shoe, that kind of thing too. If you're visually impaired, you've missed that detail. So just to kind of show you just the importance of vision itself. CVI and both CDD are actually disabilities of brain connections. That protein that's deficient brings on those neurons together too. And when we look at CVI itself, it's a connection problem too as well. And one of the sort of neurology, physical therapy kind of things too, neurons that fire together, wire together. So when we start to stimulate vision, you can almost see
the brain connections that are developing. And then when we really think about vision itself, it's something that, again, with all the comorbidities going on, vision is something that is positive that we can work on, that will impact many, many different areas. Not only just thinking about incidental learning, but socialization and that interaction and what the information that we will get from it too as well. Just talking about CVI in itself, there's certainly things are changing and it gets a little bit confusing at times. So sometimes CVI is known by cortical vision impairment, cerebral vision impairment, or neurological vision impairment. And because of the confusion, it happened to be, and the Europeans were calling it cerebral, and then in the United States they were calling it cortical. So what was the difference? So they've just come up with the general consensus to call it CVI. Again, general definition is CVI is a brain-based visual impairment. It's a disability of access. The eyes can see, but that's sort of actually, it can be in conjunction with an ocular condition, like for example, glaucoma or any of the retinal disorders too as well. The research that I looked at for CVD, there is a component, but it's a very minor component. So in most cases, the eyes, the ocular, are working fine. Generally, according to Dr. Roman, how we sort of suspect and then hopefully diagnose CVI is that vision impairment cannot be explained by an eye exam. Usually what happens is the eye reports come back, everything looks okay, but why isn't this child seeing typically? And again, if there's a neurological issue, again, suspicious of that too as well, and certainly with CVD, there is a neurological component too as well. And then also having these unique visual behaviors, which we're going to go into too as well. Again, there's certain visual behaviors that are unique to CVI. And so that's one of the things too, so when you start to see these visual behaviors, again, you might suspect CVI too and explore a little bit more in detail. Again, first behavior is color, okay? And some of the terminology of the behaviors is now changing too as well. You have Dr. Roman's work, okay, and she has the 10 characteristics. And then you have Perkins School for the Blind, which added 6 more and changed the language a little bit. You have Dr. Dutton and Dr. Lewick, and so you have all these people, which is all good in one respect. But sometimes, particularly if you go on YouTube, you'll see all these different variations too as well. So I just kind of differentiate. Usually they're talking about the same thing in some sort of fashion too as well. So color is a big one. Does parents out there, does your child have a favorite color that they tend to look at more so than that kind of thing too? Would you mind sharing?
Red and yellow.
Okay, usually it's a primary.
Just yellow.
Okay, gotcha. You as well too. The impact of light. Generally, what happens is a lot of staring up at light, windows, ceiling fans is a really one too that's very characteristic too as well. But what's really important about these behaviors is not only are we identifying possible CVI, but then these are your strategies that you're going to use for intervention. Difficulty with distant viewing. Generally with CDD, there's generally nearsightedness too as well as myopia, according to the research that I looked at too as well. So again, any setting where again, activities, for example in the classroom, if the rest of the students are doing something off in the distance, they miss that. Impact of motion, for parents out there too, does motion team seem to draw their attention to as well, okay? And that's a really important one that we're going to talk about in terms of intervention too as well. Response time. It does take a while for the system to kick in. Usually as a measurement too, and that can be a really nice measurement tool when we do our assessments, to say, hey, that response time has decreased when we respond to something too. And jumping back one too in terms of the distance vision, again, usually we're presenting in near vision, which is near space, which is about 12 inches or elbow. And if you think about visual development, in typical infants. If you look at mom, particularly breastfeeding, the distance from here to there too. So that sort of correlates to in terms of typical vision development, so keeping that spatial thing to in mind too as well. Visual guidance of the upper limbs, Dr. Roman would term it as vision guided reach. And again, this is a Perkins edition, vision guidance of the lower limbs. And as a physical therapist, I love it. Okay? Because again, being aware of where your feet are in space and your rest of your body is very, very important. Impact of clutter, crowding, and spacing. Dr. Roman would call this complexity. In terms of complexity of the environment, there's complexity of faces. Faces are very, very complex too as well too. But you can kind of see if I asked, someone to pick out a certain thing in all that collaboration, usually that is very, very difficult. And again, visual recognition. Do I recognize something too that's very familiar to me as well? Form accessibility, that is complexity of the object, I think in Dr. Roman's term too as well. One of the things that's really important about object, again, and when we look at vision itself too. So if I take a 3D character, and you all see three-dimensionality there too going on too as well, and I change it up to a color photo. I have taken a lot of visual information away when I go from 3D to 2D. The form is now suddenly different. I've taken away some of the lighting that gives me the detail in terms of what it is. So again, when we're thinking about interventions, we really need to see the impact of what we do is when we go from 3D to something like that too as well. And then bumping it up another one too. Suppose I go to a facsimile that does it in there too as well. Okay, so. Visual field is usually impacted too as well. We usually have a certain space that we go to as well too. Again, surveying too. Does your child have an area in space that they seem to see better in too as well? Get you coming up too as well. What you going on? And then the other one is access to people, and Dr. Roman would call that faces too. And faces are very, very detailed in terms of it, and very complex. Not only do we have this sort of three-dimensionality type thing going on, but then we have this thing moving as well. And again, to be able to impact that too. And some individuals with CVI can see maybe for a big face, but they can't follow your mouth. Okay? So if you are a speech therapist, okay, and you're working on, let's say, articulation, and you're looking at that mouth formation too, that might be a consideration to go to maybe another form of access to getting that skill too as well. This is an example of definitely complexity and perhaps going ahead of where an individual might be functioning on a CVI scale. This is often what I see, and again, Dr. Roman, which I'll talk a little bit about in terms of how she puts things in phases. And it's a 10-point scale, and what happens is 0 is no vision whatsoever, and 10 is more typical visual behaviors as well too. So oftentimes what I see is this type of communication device, and there are over 70 icons on that device too as well, okay? So when we're thinking about visual complexity, that's an example. So if you have a child, and again, the next slide will kind of talk into that too, in terms of phase 1, and these children are functioning at, the vision is very inconsistent. There are a lot of staring off into space and that kind of thing too going on. Occasionally they'll do a fixation going on too as well. And so we put this up front and expect them to have to do that? No. So even if we break it down into its more simpler form, what does this mean? what does this mean? Is this popcorn perhaps? Maybe goldfish? Is this, I'm raising my hand because I want goldfish? So it can be interpreted depending on what that might be. If you're really interested in this too, his name is Matt Tejan. He's a speech therapist, as I don't think he's a TVI, out of New York, and he actually does a lot of courses through Perkins School for the Blind. Excellent in terms of communication and CVI. I've learned tons from him too in terms of it too as well. So again, just highlighting that again, the importance of assessment, because that not only tells us where we need to start on, but it also gives us appropriate interventions too as well. So we don't end up with a phase 1 student or patient getting a communication device like this, or even working on icons too as well. Suppose you don't have a formal diagnosis. What to do, what to do, what to do. Okay, and how do you explain this? Anybody have difficulty explaining or getting a diagnosis with CVI, or talking to your school systems about that they do need intervention? Anybody experience that difficulty too as well? Okay. One of the things to think about is, first of all, one of the advantages of CDD is that comorbidity list has CVI listed on it too. So it's their imprint. So you really can't argue with that too as well. And knowledge is power. Again, the more you know about this, the more that you can discuss with either that medical professional or that related service specialist, or the dumb PT that might not be able to do it. Provide resources, and there's tons out there too. YouTube is, there's many different videos, but I will warn you, and we'll talk a little bit about that too as well. Sometimes there's a lot of perhaps misinterpretation of, and they really don't follow where that student is at. So you might have a student in phase 2 that's actually functioning in phase 1, and so you see a lot of materials that way too. Dr. Roman's on there a lot too as well, and Dr. Tuttle, so you can get it there too. So copy that too as well. Specific to the child, some of the visual behaviors that you already we have described, talk to the medical professional about that too, or the school professional too as well too. And then, for example, in Ohio, our State Department of Education has certainly a special guidelines for children with vision impairment. And under those guidelines, and again, if you're from out of state, I'm sure your state has this through their special ed department too as well. Please become familiar with that too. Fortunately, in Ohio, CVI is listed as one of the areas that do qualify for vision and services too as well. One of the little tricks that happens is that a lot of times when you're going through your IEP and your UTRs and stuff like that to an eligibility, the guidelines might be something very objective, where again it might be a specific range of visual field cut to kind of do it to as well. So that's the first part, but then in Ohio standards there's a second part to that that often isn't addressed, and it's any visual disorder that impacts their access to education curriculum. So oftentimes that one is not taken into factor two. We always are looking at those objective factors too as well. So just to kind of keep that in mind, that again, anything that impacts access to visual curriculum qualifies for services. Again, when you're thinking about intervention and proceeding onward to set the bar, because what will happen is they'll often go above what you thought that was going to be too as well. And again, one of the beautiful things about CVI is that it can change. Again, if they have the right set of intervention strategies too, you can expect change too as well. And there's a study that is was done out of Boston, looking at CDD and using vision as a measure, an objective outcome measure too as well. And they didn't use any of what their criteria was. It wasn't anything to, I think there were 5 of them that they looked at. One was an eye exam and acuities, and one called roaming, and I presume that was, with this sort of visual behavior too as well. And so, but I thought that was real interesting, is that they were taking vision and thinking, wow, this should really be looked at as an outcome measure. Because, so much is focused on the seizures and the sleep disorders and stuff like that too. Well, what vision, as we discussed earlier, what vision can do. When we use these visual behaviors, again, they should be done with intent. Again, neurons that fire together, wire together. So we want that intentionality in terms of that too, in order to be able to develop those connections too as well. So the bigger the input, the more dramatic, the more input that we'll get to as well. Again, we're using color, movement, and focus lighting. One of my big tools that I carry all the time is the proverbial flashlight. Okay, because that way I can get a little bit too visual. Again, demonstrating a little bit here too. Always present in their preferred visual field, especially if it's new material. If it's things that they're familiar with too, yeah, you can start to expand out of that visual field. But anything that you're doing that's new or in a complex environment needs to be in that preferred field as well too. Balance the task with multitasking. If there's a lot of noise going on and it's a crowded restaurant that you're in or something like that too, probably not a good time to work on vision as well. Again, that's multitasking, which is very difficult for any of us to do as well. Visual fatigue is another one too. Again, vision is a lot of work, and I'll give you an example I'm sure you're all familiar with too, is if you've been spending how much time on your computer screen, how do your eyes feel? Okay? And there's a rationale behind that too, is because what happens is the eye muscles that control your pupil are working to hold that sustained fixation too as well. And so it's very impactful, especially when we're dealing with children with a neurological impairment too as well. The effect of seizures, and unfortunately with CDD, that's a huge role into it too as well. And a lot of times what will happen is, they'll have a seizure and then whoop, everything seems to be fine. Well, maybe it's not fine, because seizures do last, the effects of seizures do last a little bit longer than we really think too as well, to respect that. Thinking about medication, that can have an effect in terms of how children might be able to respond to as well. And how can we make this easy for you as a parent? You have so many things on your plate going on too as well. And so if we incorporate this into daily routines, and the same follows for school, how can we impact there too, so that, at circle time, how are they working on that too? How is the OT working on this too as well, so that they get a little bit of, vision snacks throughout their entire day? As I had mentioned earlier too, and this comes out of Dr. Roman's work, again, when she breaks it down, her 10-point scale into phases. And phase 1 is building consistent vision, okay? These are the kids that are inconsistent, their eyes are roaming the whole bit too. And so what we want to do is start to focus on visual fixation and getting more longer sustained vision on an object, a preferred object too as well. And again, we're looking for stable and sustained vision, okay, and generally, and I think too, it's called a fixation. Objects, we're looking at their preferred color, familiar or shiny, and a simple background, because we're looking at complexity. You remember the slide with the all the toys and stuff scattered on the floor in the room, thinking about that, and again, eliminating that background too as well, okay? And the proverbial pinwheel is always a favorite, usually. Phase 2 is where we are now getting, we progressed from phase 1 into phase 2, which is now we have more sustained fixation. We can look at things more consistency. That wait time, that latency that was there too, has now decreased on probably familiar objects that they are favorite objects. And now what has happened is to anything, for example, new, we would expect more of latency to go on in anything too as well. So kind of looking at this progression, and again, if your child does eat, again, this is the perfect time to be able to work on a little visual snap too as well. So you can kind of see this set up too as well for us too as well. We have a plain background, okay? And even if you don't have a black tray, you can always use, for example, one of the table runners too as well, that cloth one too that can be rolled up to, well, placemat, black placemat too as well. And notice the contrast. Again, we've used a favorite color. And what's really important to think about here is that that favorite colored thing is coming to this, okay? And this is about survival, okay? We eat to survive. And so when we pair those two together, vision, that kind of thing too going on. So for example, red spoon, I would move it, maybe have a flashlight, shine it on it too, get that fixation, even if it's for a nanosecond, move in there, and going on there too as well. And notice what they've done too is they decreased the complexity. They put a black background too, and then the child is facing away from the window, because again, one of the CVI characteristics is light, movement to light. And if you really think about it, the retinas are supposed to do that. We're supposed to be drawn to light as well too. Again, as you as a parent, you can catch things out of mind. If you're a teacher, you know what your students are kind of doing just by the movement too as well. And there's some really interesting research, again, online, where the original thought that vision was supposed to be is to tell us night and day. That it wasn't really for object recognition and stuff like that too. And evidently there's a group of primitive cells on the lower end of the retina called meloxin cells. And all those cells are there for is to detect light. And the idea is because your retinas are the only cells in your body that detect light to tell the rest of the body, ready to start your day, or ready to shut down your day too as well. And very, very sensitive to yellow and orange, and if you think about the sunrise and sunsets too as well too. So, and again, what has happened here is now in the second phase, as we're progressing them up the phase chain, we've increased their complexity. We're changed the colors up, still probably primary colors too. We added again, it's still a black background, but what could have been done a little bit better? We could have perhaps put red tape on it, something like that too as well. Okay, so that again, if that's something that is there too as well, that's something that is in a daily routine. And again, phase 3, and these children look very, very functional. In fact, a lot of times what will happen is the phase 3 children is like, what's the problem here? But according to Dr. Roman, they need more services than the kids function in the lower phase 2 because they are so subtle too as well. Again, they're foolish because they get around very well. They can start reading and things like that too as well. But they have little things too. They may not be able to see your face, going on too as well. They may not be able to pick mom out of a crowd of people too as well yet too as well. They compensate very well too as well. So again, they've gone from that 3-dimensionality to 2-dimensionality to viewing distance has improved, and again sensory environment to distractibility is a lot too. I have a student in summer camp at the Sight Center, and definitely an issue for him. As soon as his peripheral vision picks up a movement, boy, and especially if the task is hard, it goes there too as well. So, one of my suggestions is because your lives are so involved with your children, how can we make it easier for you to? And my thought is to have a bag of intervention that you can attach to wheelchairs. You can have at where they eat as well. The changing table in the bathroom is too as well too. So those are some suggestions that we've got, and I certainly try to live what I suggest too. So this is my bag. Going on to as well. And again, in my bag, I have the proverbial pinwheel, and then, of course, one flashlight, and actually two flashlights. I always lose them. I always have them in my pockets too as well too. These are really nice. Anything that you can pick up, and we're not talking expensive things too as well. Dollar Tree, unfortunately too. And when again, I highlight this too, and I might use the flashlight for just a moment to get that visual attention, and then go on to as well. And it's very, very tactile too as well. Again, we've looked at Elmo, but Elmo of my Elmo talks. Okay. So what we can do is we can add three-dimensionality. And if you really think about it, Jim Henson, the founder of the Muppets and company too going on, definitely had it right in terms of what attracts children and the visual things too. It's colorful. It's got these big white things on top too that have dots on them. This is what really stimulates children in terms of their visual attention to this big orange round thing too on there too as well. And then when we add a sound to it too as well, wow, that just really adds the impact to it as well. And if you really want to see, again, we know that marketing, especially to commercial products, know our behaviors very, very well. So next time you go down in the grocery store, go down the cereal aisle. Look at what's looking at you, okay? So all the cereals that are marketed to children have a character in it. And the character isn't looking at you directly. It's off to the side, because that peripheral, that side glance gives you even more detail as well. And so Captain Crunch, for example, you look at that cockatoo for Fruit Loops and stuff like that too. So now you as adults that want to eat a little bit more healthy, where are your cereals? Up on top, too as well, too. But those cereals too, and so you can kind of see, again, they really studied marketing too as well, so too. Again, bebop is always a really important thing too, and bebop does talk, in terms of too. And again, it has a flashing light too on it too as well, and his head will move too as well. I always carry a massager. Okay, because I'm not only working on vision, but I'm working on other body parts too as well, so sensory things too as well. So we can easily, again, use this as something to, and it needs new batteries, but it does light up too as well. Oh, sorry. Okay, big, too as well. This, again, this is really popular too. Love this. And the last thing too that's really, really easy, these things, okay? And what can be nice is you can go here, or they can go on ankles too as well too. You can attach, anything to it too as well to make it more interesting. If you're at a birthday party, attach that Mylar balloon to this too, so when they raise it up, you've got movement, noise, and everything sensory too going on too as well. And again, for example, if they move their feet, they're going to be able to kick and things like that too as well. So. These are some examples. Again, you can create your own book, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out and buy that. You can go to any craft store or something like that too and get the things too and make your own to be able to do. I don't know if you're familiar with active learning and Lillian Nielsen's work too as well, but this is wonderful too because we'd like to see incidental play, self-play, when you don't have that interaction too as well. And so you can go online, it's active learning space in terms of this too, where again, it's not necessarily vision, but it's definitely reaching out of space and looking at too as well. Too. You certainly can make this a vision activity too as well. The beautiful thing about this is you can do it in many different positions. You can make it bigger. Some are made out of PVC piping to that going on to as well, and you can make them so that wheelchairs can go underneath them and stuff like that too. So. These are some example, again, strategies to see on the active learning space. Again, have some real creative things too, and they'll actually give you the directions in terms of how to make the materials too as well, in terms of what you need. A lot of you parents, how many medical waiting rooms are you waiting in? You know, how many therapy rooms are you waiting in? You know, as well. And so that's an opportunity for a vision snack and possibly using your wheelchair as a therapy tool. Again, as part of the daily routine, you can use the little room concepts in it too because they have that security around them as well. So that's really kind of important, and generally speaking, if you have adaptive seating, they have head control, they have trunk control, and that helps with the vision system too as well. Again, some of the things that you can do in strategies, you can change the orientation of the stroller so that they get the impact of where you are in space there. It's called object to space going on to as well. So for example, you could turn the wheelchair around a little bit and talk to them from behind just to give them that perception of as, oh, you know, mom is behind me or dad is behind me or dad is beside me going on to as well. Change the speed so they get a little bit of vestibular stimulation too as well. Again, perhaps having your bag of tools attached amongst the other things that you're carrying around with it too. I use a lot of this too in school because I'm also a school-based therapist. I do this in the school. I'm working around them. I'm grabbing their feet and holding it. I'm calling out numbers that, and in terms of that academic pairing too as well. I'll stand behind them, hold the swing, and let them know so that they get that idea in terms of it too as well. So they get that spatial concept. This is, now I've got to be able to do this. I've got a video that I'd like to show. I think if I do this. Okay, yes, this is going to work. Okay. I love this video. I love this video because if you didn't hear anything else I've said this morning, this is everything. Oh, you know what? Sorry. Why this isn't showing here? I am so sorry.
You may have to share that other screen. Keith, when you are sharing your slides,
maybe what we
you
can
have
do
to change
is
the
we can come
sharing.
back to these and once we see it too as well. Because it really gives a nice demonstration in terms of once we start to increase that vision, what happens to as well. So I'll try to come back to that once we finish up here too as well. One of the things that's important, and again what these videos were showing, is the idea of sharing and engaging with somebody else. And versus just engaging with the object or not engaging with it at all too as well. So that was the idea behind that. If you want, the one is LV's story and the other one is movement, learning, with CDD, I think. And they're very short videos, but they're really very, very impactful.
We're having a little trouble with the presentations this week, let me tell you. Yeah, you can all feel free to add that to the survey.
And when we look at this,
See if I can help.
Sure.
oh, we have someone that's AD. Actually, if it's possible, if you could do the videos, and then I can go from there too. The
This
videos,
video here?
he's got them listed underneath here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I don't know how to pull that up on the screen. There. And I don't know how to pull that up on the screen.
That's the one last time I was in, so it probably wasn't bad.
So you and your chair.
It was a whole lot of fun.
It did finally work though.
It did finally
Finally
work.
work.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe they had to keep. I thought maybe that would be more helpful than just.
Usually it is.
Yeah, that's what I thought it would be embedded in the. I even asked upstairs. Is this gonna go like that?
Yeah,
And she said,
Oh,
"It's great."
yeah.
It works
What
great.
insanity.
There is,
Sorry, while we're trying to figure that out too, does anybody have any questions for me as well? Yeah.
So I read Dr. Roman's book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I read the book of Dr. Roman, is that her name? Yes.
Dr. Roman?
And I really liked it, and it's all, I could see our daughter in this book and all. So I'm trying to follow her recipe, kind of. However, she says that you have to use the same toys all the time. That that's the best. Like you have repetition and you make stations and you have like the same. But with our daughter, I feel that when I introduce something new, she's really happy with it and engaged with it. So I was just wondering your experience. Because I feel that it's a good change, but she's quite persistent saying it hasn't been staying.
yeah, that's the problem.
The question is Dr. Roman, in her suggestions in terms of it too, is that when you're working with you always present the same favored toy to as well. And your experience has been that anything new that's presented to your child, they seem to be more engaged and stuff like that too. One of the things that happens is that when you use those same familiar objects, it doesn't mean that you stay with that thing all the time. What you're doing is, for example, taking that object and let's say it's an Elmo or something like that too. So what I might do is you need to start changing this Elmo up with maybe this Elmo, okay? They're similar, but they have some difference. Oh, look, there's a fish on it. There's something like that too. Or you could put, I have an Elmo that has a party hat on it too as well. And so that's how you're progressing the complexity of the object to it too as well. And again, and hopefully we can get the videos up too as well, that you can see to make sure that we've actually got visual fixation, versus I'm going off the sound, I'm going off the thing too as well. And so you really have to look at that intent in terms of what we talked about, to make sure that the eyes are focused on, that they're looking at it. And it might be just for a second, but you're looking for that too, so you're expanding that content too. And so you might take an Elmo and then put something like in red, so it might be another character or something. But then what's really important is
I tried.
You could
you
announce it,
expect
we just link to our.
them to understand exactly what that change is, so you talk about that change. What is different about that we just presented? So that's that overlay, is what she calls it as well. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
How many people does it take?
Yeah, and I don't know where it's.
You just want to share this. Any other questions?
What you said that it could be improved through whatever intervention. I guess what's the mechanism that's improving? Is it the neural pathways, or is the eye getting stronger, or what?
Okay. The question is, what's the mechanism of improvement? Yes, neural pathways. Again, what we're developing is those connections. And think about the mechanism of CDD, where unfortunately that protein is important for establishing those connections and the proliferation of those connections. And when you look at it, for example, cerebral palsy or any of the brain injuries too, what happens is you do have a disconnect. It's the peripheral vision, essentially, a dorsal stream, isn't connecting to the ventral stream, which gives us all the detail in the central things too. So when we're putting that input in there too, we are doing this too as well. So that's what's happening. Thank you. Good. Anything else?
So I was told by my daughter's surgeon sister
that.
I'm sorry.
I was told by my daughters that if they don't make any progress by the time that they're 8, then they're not going to make any more progress. Do you find that that's true?
Okay, so the question is, you were told, I won't identify who we were told by, but anyways, that if we don't see progress by the age of 8, sorry, that's it. No, there's something called neuroplasticity, okay, going on in the brain. And again, when you have a child, especially if they, before puberty, sky's the limit. In terms of it too as well. So there's a lot that you can do with brain changes too. And the new research coming out that even us older people, we can change. And so, sorry, I would disagree with that. Okay. And the question is it the correct intervention, and is that why you're not seeing progress? And that's why it's really important. I can't emphasize assessment enough, because that gives us that starting point too. And that gives us, wow, once I ask that parent, hey, what color? Do they have a visual field that they like to present? How do you know if they're looking? That already gives me a detail in terms of what it is. And then in my brain, when I'm thinking faces, okay, I know where they're thinking next to go on to as well. And then I'm also looking at, are they responding? If they're not responding, I need to change things up, okay? Because again, when you see these videos, I think we might have it. When you see these videos, wow, they're very, very powerful. Again, they say more than I've said in 50 minutes here.
Can I
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not confused to that question. So, my daughter is going to be 17, so I feel that she has improved in the last 2 years better than what she has done in the last 5 years. Yes, 100%. So it's not like age or something, but it's just or probably it's her seizures and everything to medically how she's doing. She's tracking much better, although I still hate the fact that she looks at my husband not like why? She does the eye contact with you, but not
That's why kids say dad before they say mom.
Sir, can I just ask one thing? Did anyone try? Because what if we use red lipstick to see? Because I just want her to see my face. Right. And she doesn't see my face. Have anyone tried it? A lot of people.
I haven't tried red lipstick, but I noticed with Elsa when I would, hold, and she's 18, but I still sit with her on my lap a lot because I need the cuddle. But a lot of times if the lights are a little dim, she will be, and I glance down, she's looking at my face a lot. If the lights are up and stuff, not. But if it's just like half lit, I look down, and that's when I'll get the most contact. So it might be different. Maybe she needs red lipstick, but I don't know. It may just be situational a little bit.
Yeah.
My wife, she's a grandmother, she always goes to Marvel when she's sitting across the school.
So she can recognize.
Excuse me, your parents have taken over.
They don't have any audio connections to the projectors. I'm gonna go see if they have something I can pull out.
Which video? That's the one, yeah. Actually, if we can. How's that now?
My whole thing is
There we go.
hinged on.
Oh. Thank you very much.
Where were you last night?
Love you, DVD package.
Right? Exactly. It does have CD. So again, and you can kind of see where again with the low tone going on too as well. So again, just again, look at our eyes. They're kind of roaming, they're random, they're not unusual. For infants, it's not unusual to have random eyes at times, but then we're looking for, more of a fixation to
You can understand last night in the show. Like that.
Now, there.
Making us up.
Okay, did you see that momentary fixation? power of those behavioral strategies. Added light, motion to as well. And again, do we hold the fixation for any period of time? No, but we've got a fixation. And that's that intent. And that leads us to, again, now what happens again, eyes are roaming, start to come back, we're in midline, okay, now, there. Vision guided. There. That is what I'm talking about, okay? So, you know what? You could have just watched that video and cut me out. Again, eyes are wandering. There, we've gone back to it. Again, we've got the light control, which really helps with vision. And looking at the age, but don't be the older children can't benefit from the same strategies and things like that. And again, my question to about, again, if they reach age 8, sorry, that's probably going to be it. No, you can't get that to.
No, but you're totally right. No, you're not. I totally saw both those names, and I'm like, no, you're 100% correct.
Question? Yeah, just question.
Well, thank you very much.
What was she
the last slide.
doing with the movement, with the head? She was doing like subtle movement with her
I'm sorry.
head. She was, the second caregiver or whatever, or positioner was actually doing like a subtle movement with her head. Was that to try to stimulate like a little bit of vestibular at the same time?
And also getting the feeling, I'm sorry, the question was, what was the therapist doing in terms of that head rotation and stuff like that too? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is called Feldenkrais technique too. ABM, Annette Beignet method, is another form of Feldenkrais too. And it's about learning movements and stuff like that too. And again, when we think about head rotation and vision, one of the things that happens is we should be wandering in the Serengeti, okay? And so what happens is something's rustling. Oh, what is it? Could be danger, could be tiger, run, you know? And so eyes and stuff like that too. And so you can do one little exercise while you're here. Take your thumbs, put it on the back of your skull, just really lightly on that little shelf. Real lightly too, going on. And now move your eyes back and forth. You should kind of feel the muscles underneath there too. There's a direct connection. This is called the cervical ocular reflex. And the idea is this to pair with peripheral vision because when I turn my head. And so you're leveraging that. Okay, and then you're also getting functional things too, because we really want to get that body rolling and stuff like that too, because once we get stuck against gravity, and of course with the low tone, you know, gravity is not my friend, you know, and so going on, so she's leveraging that. So great questions. Thank you very much. There are many resources. That would be my last slide. In terms of Perkins School for the Blind, is really very helpful. Certainly going on the internet. Dr. Roman's work too. She's out of Pittsburgh, but she travels internationally too as well. She's very good too. Texas School for the Blind is very, very good. If you're local or even if you're not, Cleveland Sight Center, we'd be glad to guide you in the right direction too. And if you are local or if you are in town, please call. We'd love to work with you. So thank you very much. You've been great.